and welcome to another episode of The Heart of CX. I'm Joanna Palmer, and we have another guest here with us today. Max Ball, do you want to introduce our guest?
Oh boy, I can't wait to. Thanks, Joanna. Daniel Ord is someone who I met through a fellow acquaintance who works with us here at RingCentral. He has been doing enablement around CX for many years and just has such a great perspective and thoughts around CX and contact center, et cetera. So Daniel, I want to give you a chance to just talk a little more about who you are and what you do, and then we'll start peppering you.
Oh my, okay. Well, usually I send people straight to a LinkedIn profile, but very quickly, Max, I mean, I'm very proud to say I came up through the contact center industry, super proud of that. I started there in 90, believe it or not, ran big centers in the US, moved to Asia, ran big centers in Asia. And then 20 years ago, I set up a training and consultancy in Singapore at that time where I was living, where basically we deliver workshops for people on things like contact centers and CX and so forth. And we also conduct a lot of mystery shopper research for clients around the world. So we actually assess quality, report back on quality. It's been a nice link. So, and that company our company turned 20 years old this year. So of course we're quite proud of that.
Wow. So
yeah, 20. I know.
You're younger than my second marriage. Congratulations.
That'll be another webinar we do on our relationship difficulties, but here we'll stick with contact center and CX.
That's a whole different topic. And speaking of topics, culture and CX and how the two interweave, and how they drive what it is. And Daniel, to kick it off, I mean, culture is as gushy and amorphous a concept as you could possibly come up with. Help us, kind of ground the term for us a little bit and what you mean, because you have some very specific thoughts about it.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. I mean, CX is squishy, and then within CX, you have a competency called culture, which is also squishy. So, you got to wear your boots to get out there and walk through this stuff. There's so many great definitions of culture out there, but the one I use that seems to have really been working out is it's a group's shared assumptions of how to succeed around here. And the reason I like this definition is it includes how to succeed around here. What are the things we have to do here at work to make sure the boss likes us, that we don't get into trouble, that we do the right things? And I've always found that very, very powerful. And the way I bring it to life visually is, imagine you're a new hire, and within that first week or 2 weeks or 2 months or 3 months, and we're talking pre-pandemic, but you lean over the cubicle or your neighbor leans over the cubicle, and then your neighbor says, never go home before the boss goes home. Wow, okay. Make sure you do X, Y, Z. Well, there you go. That's group shared assumptions of how to succeed around here. And some of these assumptions can be very strongly held. Now, clearly they're flowing from the management team, but they can be very, very strongly held. So that's the definition I've been using.
So I'm curious, when you say they're flowing from the management team, how much of that is intentional and things they lay out and talk about, and how much of that are things like people get yelled at if they go home before the manager?
I think that, and there you go, it's a bit like CX. You have an experience which could be not exactly what you're looking for. The fact you don't have an intended experience doesn't mean you don't have an experience. You do have an experience. That came across a little bit like a tongue twister. So I think the key here is you're having some kind of culture. The question is it the intentional culture that you're after? In other words, and I had a lady write to me last week and say, Dan, I never thought of that. I want to consider, what is it that I do that person in the cubicle leans over and says the things that I hope that she says. It never occurred to me that way, that it was that much on the ground kind of way of looking at it. I said, yeah. So that's where your intention comes in and helps. And I'll say this, Max and Joanne, it's this cultural belief thing, and managers come to work with cultural beliefs in them. And can I share with you some of the cultural beliefs that we've experienced with clients and that we share in culture classes?
Yeah.
Here's absolutely one I think you'll enjoy. And this literally popped up in 2018. People that work at home are not as productive as people who work in an office. Can I say that again? People
Please.
who work at home. So pre-pandemic, so you're in a bank and you mentioned, because you're in the contact center industry, hey, do you have any work at home agents? No, 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 we don't. We never plan for it. We're not going to plan for it because we believe. Now, the interesting thing to me about cultural beliefs is they're not necessarily true. There's no data that says that's true or not true, but it's strongly held by the person in charge, and that becomes a belief. Here's another one I've come across now and again, depending on whatever country I might be in. We believe that only a person from our nationality, so fill in the blank, it doesn't matter, can teach people in our country. That's a cultural belief. So now and then when we would bid for certain training programs in certain markets, we would get a nice note saying, no, we've not accepted your bid simply because we believe that only a person who grew up in this country can teach someone who lives in this country. Well, but again, this is just a cultural belief, and it doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but it's still strongly held. In places like Japan and Korea, you don't go home before the boss goes home. So that's just the way it is, and we've heard these stories before. In other places, when you're in a meeting room, the boss is always right. So even if you don't think the boss is right, you don't say anything because that's not going to help you succeed around here. So I think these are just some examples of cultural beliefs. And I'll close out by saying on this topic, frankly, some cultural beliefs can help you. They're going to take you where you want to go. You're glad you have those and you want to nurture those. But other cultural beliefs, you have to look at it pretty critically and you have to say, are these helping me? Are these taking me in the right direction? Maybe I need to weed those ones out. So I find this whole topic of a group shared assumptions and then understanding where these assumptions came from and are they helpful or not.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I want to drill down on the word assumptions.
Yep.
Because I think a lot of what we're talking about already is the cultural pieces that don't fit, that don't work, that you don't necessarily want.
Yeah.
And if those are coming from assumptions, it's how do you approach finding your assumptions?
I think that is really a fair question. So you buy a puzzle, and on the cover of the puzzle box is a picture. And I think when you're establishing culture, you're deciding what that picture is going to look like. I think that's probably one of the single most important steps. Some people call it the North Star. Some people call it the vision. Some people call it the vision and the values. We don't have to go too far down that road. I agree with all of that because at the end of the day, I think what good leadership tends to be really good at is repeating the same message over and over. Look at both of you nod because I have no doubt that you find yourself repeating yourselves. No, now I'm on a conference call with San Antonio. Here we go. Now I'm on a conference call with Mumbai. Here we go. But that's what great leaders do is they reinforce really compelling messages. But obviously that message has to be crafted. So I think that's where the senior management team has to sit down and say, look, we are individuals. We come to this game with our own assumptions, but we're representing our company and we want the people working here to represent us. How do we see ourselves? What's our vision, values, all this kind of stuff? I think it really revolves around that, Max, for me.
So I think a piece of that then is flooding the assumptions and the unintended with very intentional messaging and making that and being a good marketer and having it simple and repeatable.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, simple and repeatable. I think, in some of the culture work we've done, the client has on their own come up with their own messaging, which makes sense to me. They sat down as a board or CEO or set of owners and said, this is who we are. Then when they come to a person like me, they're basically saying, help us spread the message across a large group of people and also get those people's feedback on that message because we want that message to get through, but because we're the CEO and the CFO, et cetera, we don't have the time always to be the one out there running that message. So that's when they'll hold workshops and events and that kind of thing to communicate that message that we were talking about.
So tell us about that process, about the process of defining that new culture and then getting employee buy-in so that you can achieve that transformation.
Yeah, Joanna, and let's have a conversation about this. I mean, I think I hate to start with the mistake, it sounds negative, but one of the mistakes is trying to dictate the culture, but that's not how people work. We don't like to be dictated to. We're adults. So I've kind of used a three-step process. And when I'm doing culture workshops, I actually tell people, I mean, very transparent about it. I said, you guys are going to go through 3 phases with this culture transformation thing. Step one for me is you need to understand the puzzle picture we're talking about. What is the vision your company has set? What is the picture they're after? What are the values that they want? So typically at that part of a session, I'll literally walk through and say, for example, your company chose ownership. So here's what I think ownership is, and here's how I've seen it work. Your company has selected X and Y. To me, that's the intellectual part, Joanna. You got to understand it intellectually. What is it? Why did my company choose it? The second phase is I call belief. But one thing I say to people straight away is, I can't make you believe. I'm not a I'm not a dime store magician standing on a soapbox, doing magic tricks on you. I mean, nobody can make anybody believe anything. And once you realize that, it's very empowering. Obviously, I can use influence and hopefully convey things in a way that you'll be asking yourself questions, but you're all going to come to belief in your own time, in your own way. And the reality is, some people in that room are already glommed on to the new vision. They're like, yay, I'm proud of working here. By the way, this is something I find pops up a lot in culture that was unintended. When we were doing culture workshops, we'd go back to the client and say, do you realize how proud people are to work here? Some of them said, oh, you reminded me why I'm so happy I worked here for 17 years. So happy to have, and it just popped up out of the blue that they were reminded of, wow, just it's a little bit of that Hawthorne effect. You turn on the light bulb, you get some kind of productivity response a little bit, that classic stuff. I think just talking about the company and saying we're moving in a new direction, not because we've done anything wrong, but because we want to continue to do things right. So the belief thing, I'll share another point on the belief a little further in our conversation, but I want to say to people, I'm not going to make you believe, but I hope you can help each other believe and come to this in your own time. And then the third phase, and I say, look, here's obviously what your company or organization wants. They want you to act in these ways. They want you to actually make decisions around this, behave in these particular ways. And that's when they know that it's come to fruition. So some of you are going to be able to act straight away on this. Others of you aren't quite sure how to act on this. Let's say if you work in finance and now your company is saying we're customer centric, that can be a hard nut to crack. How can I be customer centric in finance? So sometimes you have to help people make those. You know what? By the way, I'm a former finance person. I'm not criticizing finance people. Yeah. No. I don't want a million emails. But I think a lot of these kinds of culture workshops is helping people connect their jobs to this kind of thing. So understand, believe, and act. And that's a motto I've used for some time, and I've seen it bear fruit over the years, with the understanding that not everybody's going to make it. I mean, I think when a company says this is what our puzzle box is going to look like, we also have to realize not everybody's going to like that picture, and they may not make it. So.
And so what happens then for those folks that can never embrace the belief? They then can't act because they don't see the vision, right? And so is there anything that we can do to help them embrace the change, or what has been your experience there?
Well, it may sound a little bit brutal, a little bit Hunger Games, but frankly, I know I'm going to lose some people. And there are some cases where it's intentional. Again, it's intentional. So if you're one of your values is you're going to take ownership, and then you just have a group of people in the contact center that just don't believe in ownership at all, want to push everything to somebody else, these people are going to actually damage the credibility of your vision. They're going to poison the barrel of all the other agents around them. Those of us from contact center know how one or two negative agents can kind of ruin it for everyone else. I remember when I let go a couple of agents, and I'm Mr. Nice. I always had a hard time operationally letting people go. I have to admit, my boss's comment to me always was, you're too nice, you need to be tougher. But I did end up letting someone go. And I remember that after I let her go, the entire team came to me and said, thank you. We wondered when you were going to wake up. because we saw this every day and we were so frustrated that you didn't see it. But then to be fair, I had seen it. I just didn't have the gumption to get up and do something about it. So I think I'll start with that side of things, with the understanding that some people are willing to be helped, want to be helped, are willing to have modeling and all that great stuff you hear about, but not everybody's going to make it at some point. So
yeah, and I think that's a great example there, Daniel. As a leader, you have to make those tough choices, and not making that choice for that individual was negatively impacting culture for many others in that organization. So yeah, and it's tough. It's tough making those hard decisions and acting on them.
I think it's, how far are we going to compromise? How far are we going to go before all of a sudden, what's the point of having the puzzle box anymore, or the picture? So again, I think there's a level here. Now, in all this, and I know you both would agree with this, the leadership modeling and acceptance is so critical, because there's no point putting your entire staff through some kind of cultural transformation and not getting the leaders on board to model and act. And that's doomed to fail, as we all know from experience.
Right.
But
And
go ahead.
have you seen that, or do you have examples of that in terms of?
I have seen in the past. I think people are more savvy these years than they were earlier on in the industry. Early on in the industry, it would be put our agents through training and get them to have a service mindset. Okay. Well, where are the team leaders? No, they don't need that part. And
Right, they don't talk to customers.
Anytime you start the training with frontliners, not including the management team, etc., yeah, it's going to not work, because first off, agents are going to go back and say, well, we learned these new things, and the managers are going to say, what did you learn? So it's not very compelling. Oh, we learned we're supposed to be this kind of company. Oh, we're supposed to be this kind of company. Never mind. Just go back and keep doing what you did. So obviously, Joanna, you can. So yeah, when you're out there in the real world, as all three of us are, you see the good, the bad, and the the Clint Eastwood movie, Good, Bad, and Ugly.
So I'm going to shift a little bit here. I love this conversation on culture, but having culture and technology transformations, and how the two are so interrelated. Let's spend a little time talking about that. There's so much going on in the world today with digital transformations and big data and customer experience transformations, and how does culture play into that? What have you seen there with the two being interrelated?
Well, it's a fair point, and I'll tell you how I approach digital transformation as an official non-techie. I value digital and all that, but I couldn't talk to it in any compelling way. To me, digital is a flavor of the customer experience. If your customer experience is primarily non-digital, then for whatever reason, then it's non-digital. Maybe you're a bakery. Mm-hmm. But then you're a telecom and you want your customer experience to be digital. So to me, it has to do with defining what kind of experience are we going to deliver for our customers at the end of the day. And I know now the big debate is how much digital, how much human, how do we balance that all out, that kind of thing. So that's where I put digital. That's why I don't think the process for culture change is dramatically different between a highly digital environment, let's say an agency of the Singapore government, which is exceptionally digital, over here to a neighborhood flower shop, which may not be requiring as much digital for whatever reasons. I think the culture transformation and discussion process and success factors are the same. It just might be that the vision we have, the puzzle box cover, is going to look different between us, but the steps that we take to bring that to life are probably still somewhat the same. What do you guys think? Because, Joanna, I think that's a really interesting question. And I'm going to turn the tables a little bit, because I'm curious from your guys' experience, how do you approach that? Because you do this every day.
Yeah. And I really do believe the two have to be addressed together. It is where do we want to go as a company? And culture is a piece of that puzzle. And so is whatever transformation you're trying to accomplish and achieve. And if the two don't go together, you're not going to have the change agents that you need to embrace the change to drive that vision forward. And that's where I see things break.
I have a couple thoughts. One, Joanna, one of our earlier podcasts, had the perfect example of a digital transformation without the culture, which is she bought a fan, and she had the most wonderful customer journey in terms of Apple Business Chat got involved, every channel you could think of. The communications infrastructure was amazing, through which she was given misinformation, through which she was ultimately unable to get the thing that she ordered. So there's all the great technology in the world if what it's leading to is a bad customer journey, because it doesn't matter what road I'm on if it's not going where I want to go. And so I think that's a big piece of all this, and that's probably the perfect metaphor, because culture is really saying that, you said it earlier, that's our North Star. That's where we're trying to go. And the greatest route to get nowhere still gets you nowhere.
It's probably a different example, but Max, you made me think of it, it's the classic contact center example of you put in some kind of new system for agents. I don't care which kind of system or what it does. They hate it. They don't use it because they weren't included in it. Nobody asked their viewpoint, their opinion. Nobody explained that now you're gonna have to be looking for this stuff on your own. This taking away from middle management of spoon feeding people, taking ownership and accountability for your performance using the tools. But you'll still walk into contact centers where the team leaders are like, our staff refuses to use the technology, or they hate it, or you talk to the agents in little focus groups and say, yeah, we hate it. And then you're like, well, was there any discussion with you as this was being put in? Because as you guys know, there's a long cycle here from the time you purchase and customize, and you're much more expert in all this. How come the VOE or voice of employee wasn't included in these particular steps? So I think the message I'm hearing from you, and Joanna, please help me out here, is that if you put the technology first and expect the culture to follow, that's not going to work. So
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point to end on. It's the culture and the technology work hand in hand, and bringing everybody along and ensuring that you've got a holistic plan to address both is absolutely critical for your success.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, and it's interesting. So for us, when we teach CX, we always say the digital steps will occur in each one of the competencies, including in culture. So if you're a highly digital environment, you'll build that into that. I keep going back to our puzzle box analogy. I think I've worn it out to death, but it works. This is where we're headed. This is what we look like. This is how we operate around here. If you're not a digital person, you don't like this kind of stuff, you're probably not going to be happy here, and maybe it's worthwhile looking somewhere else to work. I know that sounds funny, but Joanna and Max, can I say one last point on this culture thing that strikes me? And again, you made me think of this as we were talking. In culture workshops, it's very common for me to say something like, guys, if I walk into, and I'm going to name a brand here if it's okay, but if I walk into a DHL office in Mexico City, I know I'm in DHL. If I walk into a DHL office in Kuala Lumpur, I know I'm in DHL. If I walk into Phoenix, I know I'm in DHL. DHL has a very strong culture, and it's not for everybody, but for the people who it's for, they thrive on it, they love it. It's probably quite fast-paced based on who they are. There's a lot of performance expected, but that's the culture they encourage, and they make it very clear from the point you're hired up through all the steps. And then I'll say that's maybe the DHL culture. And then I'll name another company and say, if I walk into XYZ company, I can tell I'm in XYZ company. And that's the power of culture, is you can really tell, regardless of where you are in the world and you walk into an office, this is how these people behave. And I know you have clients you could talk about for hours in this way, where you can tell when you work with them what they're like, what their expectations are.
Well, and if you don't have that structure, you can't scale, because the CEO can't spend an hour with 10,000 every one of 10,000 employees for.
That's right.
And that's what it takes to deliver that consistent experience, which consistency is so important.
It is for the employee as well as the customer, so that there's predictability there on both ends.
Absolutely.
And doesn't that take us back to that discussion on leadership, modeling this stuff and not compromising? I know my boss is going to act in a consistent manner. By the way, that's a leadership principle. Acting in a predictable manner is a leadership principle. So if I know my boss operates within these well celebrated values in our company, I don't have to worry about his or her predictability. I know how he or she is going to respond. I think that would take a lot of stress off a person to have some predictability.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally
absolutely.
agree.
Isn't that funny how we got into employee experience just like that?
Yeah. Well, and Daniel, I can't think of a better experience than spending what's now 26 minutes with you. So I really appreciate the time. Joanna, I'm going to give you the last word here.
I'm going to say thank you, Daniel. This was such a great session. I love talking culture, and I really love the framework you put around this today. The how do you get adoption of a new culture? How do you implement this, and what does that mean for your customer experience? So thank you so much. It's been
You're
a
more than
pleasure.
welcome. And I have no doubt we're going to mark our calendars. We have another 2 or 3 hour catch up, guys. May not
Absolutely.
be recorded, but I think we've got some things to talk about.
Absolutely.
Thank you
We
very
will
much.
appreciate that. Thanks a lot.